In this video, we're going to paint the Phoenix from Xmen.
Hey man, I'm pretty sure we did that already.
Yeah, but there's like 2 in the box. There are so many different aspects to this hobby. Gaming, kit bashing, painting. Not lore, lore doesn't count by itself. And with all these little segments, we all have one that we gravitate towards the most, but that can change. For the vast majority of the time that I've spent in the hobby, I was focused a little bit more on gaming. But then I had a workplace accident, destroyed my hip, and couldn't get around the table as much. And with that, I had a bunch of free time on my hands, and that was all free time spent sitting down. And if I wanted to be involved in the hobby as much as I was, I had to somewhat migrate. And that's when I started taking painting just a little bit more seriously, because up to that point, I was just throwing paint so I could get ready to throw dice. So on my way from battle ready to display, I crossed the line that most people refer to as tabletop plus. We'll talk about this. But for now, we should probably start painting, and we're going to do that first up with Hydra Turquoise through the airbrush. Now, I know this is going to be packaged up and sold as a SYNTHWAVE Flame, but the real inspiration behind this was peacock feathers. But I didn't want to go completely into green, so we just hinted at it with turquoise. In miniature painting, more specifically wargame focused miniature painting, the airbrush gets a pretty bad rap. And one of the stupidest, most elitist opinions is that it's cheating. But as we move into royal blue, you can see that there's a few different ideas at play here. The airbrush really is not pay, spray and win. Since the blues in the Fnatic line are so pigment intense, I have thinned it down a little bit further so we've got more room to blend. You'll also notice that the centerpiece of this model being Jean herself, she's sprayed down in a fairly heavy zenithal in white while everything else is black. And that was done for 2 reasons. The first one being, as you can see with the wicked pink here already, transitioning from that blue which has the black undercoat into the pure white, it is starting to become more vibrant as it gets closer to the middle. Because we're applying such thin layers of paint through the airbrush, all of the colors and tones that are acting as our base really affect the final product. And you can really tell with that burning all orange the difference of spraying onto white to spraying over colors in black. Darker tones of black would generally suck the saturation out of the color, while the white will help to keep it vivid. The other thing you'll notice that we're doing is shooting from different angles. This in itself will create different effects. On the wings I'm spraying from bottom to top, which with all the molded detail is really helping to create a ripple effect. Whereas on the base I'm spraying from more of a top-down angle to create harder contrasted shadows. And with the demonic yellow on the wings, I'm spraying from top, bottom, and the middle to make sure it's got a lot more punch and pull more focus in towards the model. And if you're wondering why I'm wearing these glasses through the whole thing, it's because I'm terrible at lighting and I was just getting glare and reflections off of my normal glasses. And no, I can't see a thing without my normal glasses. I think the camera's here. Because the airbrush does suck out a little bit of saturation, we're going to come back in and pump up the jam. The fluorescent safety orange is also going to help us blend the demonic yellow into the burning ore orange and back into wicked pink. This is going to help smooth everything out while still giving us variation. We're also going to be using that exact same idea with power no glow. This is going to help re-establish the tones from wicked pink while superheating that orange transition. And using that same angled idea from before, shooting up onto the wings and down onto the flames, it's going to create more variation again. Alright, so what is this tabletop plus thing? It's basically the middle ground between battle ready so you can roll some dice and display level painting. There's no revelations and no groundbreaking information there. If you're progressing as an artist and increasing your skill level, you're most likely going to find yourself here naturally. Because that's how growth scales work. But that's only if you look at it from purely a skills-based point of view. Which we mostly do because that's easier to measure with. Jumping back into traditional brushwork, we're going to start on the suit. And just like everything else that we do on the channel, this is going to start off with a base coat of Terrestrial Titan. That's right, we're going to paint white by starting with a really deep dark desaturated purple. And yeah, it's going to get weird. You might be thinking we're going to mix in white to get there, but we're not going to use white at all. Because the first step is mixing 50-50 between Terrestrial Titan and Deep Azure. Just like when we painted the Phoenix model a few videos ago, I want to use a chromatic grey to start building into our white. This is going to help us keep the depth and contrast while building up to our white, while not just making it different shades of grey. I mean, technically it's chromatic grey, but that doesn't really count. We want interesting shadows. If you just want to build from black to white, you're going to go through all these different neutral greys, and that does get a little bit boring. It also runs the risk of running into a non-metallic metal kind of feel. For this next layer, I've mixed in a little bit of turquoise siren. And now that it's getting lighter, you can see how the purple and the greens are starting to cancel themselves out to become this weird off grey. And while it is a big jump from where we started with Terrestrial Titan, remember we're shooting for white, so this is still actually somewhere within our shadow tones. So remember to paint wider layers so you don't run out of room in the highlights. If we're looking at Tabletop Plus purely from a skills-based perspective, then isn't that just natural growth? And if it is, what's the point in using it as a term in the hobby? Well, we generally like to label goals, and when we achieve those goals, we get a new label. It's exactly the same as beginner, intermediate, and advanced. But here's the kicker. It doesn't fucking matter. This is purely just a measurable standard, and while measuring progress can be important, it isn't always relevant. I would argue that the term itself shouldn't really be applied to miniature painters that are painting for enjoyment or growth. Because honestly, the term Tabletop Plus is generally just used by commission painters so they can gauge the level of work wanted by the client and how much they're willing to pay. And when you take that into consideration, it becomes entirely transactional. Now we're starting to get a lot closer into a midtone. I'm using a very thinned down but pure version of aquamarine. Once we get to this layer, I'm a little bit more concerned with picking out the volumes. But again, because we have just moved into our midtone, what I'm going to do here is pick out the volumes with the light placement and make them very sharp, but then we're going to come back with that thinned down version and slightly feather out those edges. We want to create a blur of transition. This is going to help everything to get a bit of a shape while not losing the contrast of shadows, but also not really narrowing us all in for when we do come to that highlight. And you'll notice that I'm not too worried about blending here. This whole video is about Tabletop Plus Standard. We're doing more than slapping on the basic colors, but we're not doing as much as if this was going to go into competition or a display piece. Honestly, I've made the mistake in the past of going a little bit extra with some of my gaming models. But whenever you're handling something that much, you are going to rub the paint off. And with that, we're finally starting to move into highlights. And for this, we've taken the aquamarine from the last step and started to mix 50-50 with Company Grey. In the Army Painter Fanatics range, Company Grey is one step down from pure white. It's very light, but it's also neutral, so adding in a little bit of that aquamarine just for the coolness, it's really going to start to help here. It's keeping everything interesting. And while, yes, I did say highlight, this is actually going to sit somewhere between a highlight and a higher midtone. Because we are aiming for white, you kind of have to play a little bit more in the shadows to bring it out. And now that we're running into our final steps, this is pure Company Grey. And because this is going to be our highest highlight, we don't want to highlight everything to the exact same point. So I'm only aiming for the tops of the most pronounced shapes. The top of the shoulder, the breast, the hip, the leg, that's all that's really getting touched by this one. And yes, that bold line underneath the breast does a lot of work. There can be quite a few barriers when it comes to miniature painting. Skill, techniques, affordability, terrible companies that want to monopolize everything, and sometimes even the tools you use. But now that does not have to include your paints. Even though now I'm an Army Painter Factory team member, I was using their products before that. And to be completely honest, if they get sick of my shit and boot me off the team, I'm still probably going to be using their products. So if you wanted to grab anything that you've seen in today's video or any other video that we've done on the channel, head over to the Army Painter web store and use the code Heresy5 at the checkout. And if you're in Australia, you can jump over to in-games and use that same Heresy5 discount and... I was so close. I was so close. So if you wanted to try anything out that you've seen in today's video or any other video that we've done before, head over to the Army Painter web store and use code Heresy5 at the checkout. And if you're in Australia, you can go to in-games and use that same Heresy5 code for a 5% discount. There's links in the description to the Army Painter, in-games, the awesome Patreon, and our merch store. I don't know why I did this, but it feels grand. Are you not entertained? Alright, let's roll into the gold. I've used a bunch of different recipes over the years for non-metallic metal gold, but the one I come back to the most is this recipe specifically. So you've probably seen it on the channel before. Unless you're brand new, then in that case, maybe hit that subscribe button and you'll see it again in the future. This starts off with the base coat of Terrestrial Titan, then a 50-50 mix of Terrestrial Titan and Carnelian Skin. Working up just like a topographical map every other time that we do volumetric highlighting, we're then going to move into pure Carnelian Skin. And because I'm not actually shooting for a non-metallic metal gold, we do want something that kind of fits in with the rest of the style we've got here. So, you know, very heavy contrast between shadows and highlights. I'm not shooting for reflective. And now that we're into a mix of 50-50 demigod flames and that Canelian skin, we're going to remember to make sure that we're still painting fairly widely. We want some broad coverage when it comes to this. We want to leave the shadows very deep so we get that contrast, and then we're going to move into a very wide highlight, which is exactly what's happening now that we've moved into that pure demigod flames. One of the biggest selling factors of non-metallic metal is a lot of contrast in a short amount of space. So we're going to keep the idea of the heavy contrast, but we're going to widen out that highlight. I cannot stress this enough, and I know because I've said it 3 times now already. This is actually a very similar idea to how I would approach brushed metal, non-metallic metals, or maybe even satin or silk. And even then, for satin and silk, I probably would go sharper with the highlights. And speaking of highlights, our first mix here is ice yellow with that demigod flames. This is not 50-50, we are lightening just a little bit before we come in with even more ice yellow. We don't really go pure here, we're just going to build up in slow increments. And while it does look like it's getting quite light, we're still not going to pure ice yellow, that is just the contrast working. After this, the exact steps were taken for the face and the hair as we did with the last Phoenix model. When it comes to defining skill levels and paint standards, I think a lot of it is incredibly arbitrary. And unless there's something that you're trying to set a standard to, those titles really don't mean much. If you're a commission painter, I get it, you have to set expectations. But for everyone else, just put in as much love and effort as you see fit. As always, a massive thank you to InGames, the Army Painter, and the best Patreon members in the world. Big love, you filthy heretics.